Welcome to Block by Block, where we dive into timely topics at the intersection of crypto, tech, and society. I'm your host, Denelle Dixon, CEO and Executive Director of the Stellar Development Foundation. Join me as I sit down with a different expert each week for a conversation on how crypto and blockchain are shaping their corner of the world. We'll talk about how we're leveraging this technology to challenge norms and change the status quo, block by block. Today is a unique Block by Block. Our guests are usually folks outside the Stellar Development Foundation, but we wanted to end this season by bringing on one of Stellar's most influential voices, none other than the Stellar Development Foundation's co-founder, Jed McCaleb. Since the third grade, Jed's passion for programming has led him to solve interesting problems from file sharing to exchanging value. He started numerous companies and worked on emerging technologies for decades. In this episode, we discuss his path as an innovator, the barriers to building that he faced in the early days of blockchain, the importance of setting space as a new frontier for human exploration, and using AI to program your own crappy intern. Well, welcome. I am so excited today to have Jed McCaleb here at our podcast. Jed, thank you for joining Block by Block.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So, Jed, this podcast brings in a bunch of different listeners. So while it's strange for me to ask you this question, since I know you so well, for our listeners, could you share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Let's see. I'm a programmer by background. I've been programming since I was a little kid. I started several companies along the way, a file sharing service called eDonkey 2000. The first Bitcoin exchange called Mt. Gox, and Ripple, and then SDF, which is where this podcast is coming from, I guess. And since like resigning full time there, I've started a few other things. Vast, which is a space station company, and Astera, which is a nonprofit mainly focused on AI. So.
When you say you started programming when you were a little kid, how old were you?
I was in the third grade, so I don't know what age that is, but I'm probably around 8 or something like that.
Yeah. And why? What brought you to it?
One of my mom's friends, this is like early days in computing, like very few people had personal computers. One of my mom's friends like brought me over. I was at one of my mom's friends' houses, and he was like, "Hey, describe a video game," and I described it. And we came back like, I don't know, maybe a month later or something like that. And he showed it to me, and that blew my mind. And I was like, wow, people can do this. So I want to be able to do that. And then since then I was like trying to figure out how to make games, and that kind of like started it. So there's just the fact that you could like imagine a thing and then like see it real was super compelling, and still is to me.
So you described a video game that you wanted to play or that you knew about already?
Well, I think I had seen something like it, but yeah, I just, again, like computers were kind of new then. So like you didn't see a lot of video games. So I think I'd probably seen it. I was like, okay, I want this game where there's a little ship. And I just described that what I thought would be cool. And then, yeah, he had made it. So that was pretty awesome.
That's a pretty savvy way to get you into something, actually. And so since then, you've been coding?
Yeah. Basically, since then I've programmed. It's if I don't program for a long time, then I get pretty sad. So.
And when you do program, do you just sit and do it for hours, or do you take breaks, or how do you do it?
I definitely used to be able to just grind for longer periods of time. Like during the eDonkey days, I could just program for 16 hours a day or whatever. Now I feel like probably because I'm getting older, there's like more things going on. It's harder to find that many like that long of a block of time. So I feel like attention is my limiting factor at this point. But
yeah, you've got a lot of stuff going on. In terms of like when you just went through, it's so interesting to me when you went through the different companies that you've started. I know how and why you started each of them, but it feels to me like the story is that you were starting to fix something that you saw or fill a need that you had. Is that what you were doing with the file sharing company?
That just seemed like a super interesting problem. It's like this distributed network where you're essentially not just making one program, but it's a program that has to kind of work organically with itself, among multiple little nodes. And so it was just pretty cool to work on. Also, like the file sharing applications that existed before eDonkey, they had a lot of like very obvious problems. Like they didn't hash the files, so you never knew if you got the whole file or not. Things like that. Like there was like a lot of like innovation that we brought to it. They would like also like just download the file from the beginning, whereas you could actually just download from all the parts and get it from like many different peers at once, so the downloads could go a lot faster. So there's just a lot of cool things that were kind of like obvious that you'd want to do if you knew what you're doing. So yeah, so yeah,
The complexity of the problem was interesting to you, so it wasn't just like the solution; it was actually the way that you had to solve it.
yeah. I mean, I definitely like working on things that are like challenging and hard and interesting, right? So that was the problem with the like Bitcoin exchange is it was cool on one level, but it's not, you know, I mean, there are challenges there, especially as you scale, but like on the face of it, it's not as challenging as like making a peer-to-peer network, right? So, so it's inherently less interesting. So I didn't do it that long, but yeah.
And the Bitcoin exchange, was that your first? Was that when you first got into Bitcoin, or had you already been sort of understood it, knew about it, played with it a bit, and then you sort of delved into it?
No, that was basically I learned about Bitcoin in that summer of like 2010, and then like a couple weeks later had made Mt. Gox. So yeah, it was kind of a way to just to kind of like understand Bitcoin better and like work with it and stuff like that, like build a real thing on top of it. So that was part of the motivation, and also just there was no real way to buy Bitcoin before that, or like that wasn't super clunky. So yeah, it just seemed obvious that this thing should exist. So I thought it'd be cool.
And then you went into and developed Ripple and then Stellar soon after that. And from what was it about blockchain that was interesting to you?
Well, I mean, just the fact that I could basically before I ran into Bitcoin or discovered Bitcoin, I didn't think it was possible to solve that problem where you could have this like record or like account in the world that everybody agreed on, but no one was in charge of. And that's like a super powerful idea. It allows you to do lots of different things, and allows you to kind of operate in this decentralized manner where, you know, now you can send value around to people without really having these intermediaries, which I think is very powerful. And it's like similar to how the internet works, right? Where you know, pre-internet, you needed like intermediaries to like deliver information from one person to another. But like post-internet, you kind of don't need that, right? So and it just unlocks like I just feel like anytime you can kind of like decentralize these like concentrations of power, it ends up being better for everybody, right? This is kind of what the file sharing thing was too. It's like before file sharing, it was hard to just like if you made something, it was very hard to distribute it out there to the world. But post file sharing, like you could do that very easily, right? So yeah, so I think it was kind of a similar idea. It's just like how do you kind of enable access to lots of folks and just kind of like level the playing field essentially. Um, and yeah, and then the technology was just like super interesting. Like again, it was like this peer-to-peer system that is very complicated and yeah, it's just like technically very cool. And then I think it could potentially have like lots of really good benefits for folks. So yeah.
When you did started eDonkey and then Mt. Gox and then even Ripple and Stellar, did you start them from the standpoint of thinking about the tech stack, or were you starting from the standpoint of thinking, oh, there could be a business here, or was it both?
Well, with eDonkey, I thought that I could make something that people would like be excited about and use. With Mt. Gox, it was more just kind of on a lark, just to see like, hey, will this work? It was just kind of I mean, I only ran that for like 6 months or something like that, so it wasn't very long. Um, but yeah, and well with Ripple, yeah, I thought, hey, I think Bitcoin's awesome, but I do think that there's some more efficient way. I think the mining process is sort of this constant drag on the system, where it's kind of like sucking value out, and it's been okay to date just because there's been more money flowing into it. But at some point that will change, and at equilibrium, I think mining will be like a huge problem. So I wanted to figure out a way to again solve this like distributed ledger that everyone agrees on without mining, and so that kind of led to the idea of that like underpin Ripple. But yeah, so I was hoping that people would use that and it would take off.
So when you think about like your time when you worked full time in blockchain, so you can include Mt. Gox, you can include Stellar, you can include Ripple. What was the biggest challenge that you faced during that time from as you're building these organizations?
Um, I mean that like all of those were pretty early days in crypto, so there was, there's still a lot of regulatory uncertainty, but there was even more then. So that was definitely an issue. Uh, it was it was maybe a little bit harder to attract talent, just because like people were very uncertain about what this stuff was, and you kind of had to have a certain mindset to be into it, and it will like like a kind of an appetite for risk. Um, so I think that was one of the biggest challenges, is to actually like convince people that this wasn't just some crazy scam, and that it had legs and would be meaningful and useful for folks. That obviously like got easier and easier as the years have gone by, uh, yeah, that like the regulatory thing and just like the general uncertainty around the whole enterprise was probably the hardest part.
Yeah. I always think about the fact that we want this to happen so quickly with blockchain. And if you think about how long it took the internet to get to like success, whatever that means, uh, we are expecting massive change in a really short period of time, which I know we should be able to get to because the tech stack is there. But it's just an interesting thing to say, like, when you think about risk, I think that people feel like there's less risk now in this space. But I still think the regulatory uncertainty, like, sways back and forth like
Right.
every few days. So,
Yeah.
so those things are still kind of there.
Yeah.
Well, once you decided that that you were going to step away from Stellar, at least from a full time standpoint, I know that he's still our chair, and we still spend a lot of time together. Um, when you thought about what you were going to do next, how did you decide? I know you have two companies that you founded since then, so Astera and Vast, but how did you decide that you were going to get into the space, or in terms of Astera and AI?
Yeah. Let's see. I guess, I mean, I really like this phase between projects where, there's lots of ideas and you're kind of trying to figure out what to do, and you kind of like explore freely. I mean, once you like set on a project, like I don't, you're kind of like, I did Enoki for like, I don't know, 7 years, and SDF, I was there for like 7 years also. It's like, it's a big chunk of time that where you just like are committed to it and that's all you're thinking about. And so I definitely was, excited to to take a step back and just be able to like think broadly about, hey, what's important in the world, what am I interested in, what do my skills, like what can I actually make an impact in, like what is kind of useful to do. But I kind of got too excited and ended up starting both of these things, which in retrospect I should have just done one, but it is what it is. So yeah, so I mean, both of them are things that I've been kind of thinking about and wanting to do for a very long time. With Vast, which is essentially the goal there is, I think it's super important that people like get off the planet and out into the solar system and kind of start expanding where humans can live. And
Just before you get into, why do you think that's important?
uh, well, yeah, because basically, if you imagine this world where there's like millions of billions of people living in space, I mean, I think it's like, not only is it economically better, like there's a lot of resources up there and energy and stuff that we could harvest, and like it's like, like in terms of just like GDP, it's worth it, right? But also I think psychically it's better because people need a frontier, right? We just haven't had a frontier for a very long time because the Earth has been all explored, and if you don't have that, then the world starts feeling very zero sum, and and I think it just leads to all kinds of like bad outcomes, like with people psychically, like they start thinking about degrowth and like the wars start and all this kind of stuff. Like it's just bad, right? So having a frontier, which we've had for most of human civilization, is like, I think, super important and kind of the way we're wired. So in order to get that back again, I think is important. And so yeah, so I think I've wanted that for a very long time, and kind of always like jokingly said, like if I was ever super successful, I'd go like mine asteroids or whatever. And then when I step back from Stellar, there's been SpaceX has made a huge uh, impact in kind of in the aerospace industry. Like launch is like super is like way cheaper than it was like 20 years ago. So it's making like a lot of things more possible. And so I kind of view like, again, like if I want this world where there's like a billion people living in the solar system, what is, obviously that's far off, but like what are the steps to get there? Getting mass cheaply to orbit is sort of the first one, and it seems like SpaceX is pretty much nailing that. And then the next step is like, how do you let humans live for a long period of time? Because there, if you're in like no gravity, then that has really bad health effects. You have bone loss, like there's weird problems with your retina, all these kind of things. Like you really can't live up there for more than a year. And so if we want to do big crazy things like mine asteroids or build Dyson spheres or whatever, we need to solve human habitation, which isn't going to involve like giving them gravity. Which so like we're kind of aiming at this like space station that will spin to provide artificial gravity so people can live up there for years, and you can have like much bigger populations up there. So yeah, so that's what we're doing. We're hopefully going to launch our first module at the end of 2025 is the current plan, which is quite soon.
It's
So
insane to me that I remember when you started this, and I remember it started very small, and now it's a lot bigger, and now you're going to do this in 2025. I mean, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. Yeah, it's getting very real. Yeah, we've got about like 270 people in a facility in Long Beach where this stuff is, or building hardware and everything. So
yeah, cool. It is. It's remarkable and a really strong team there. So it's great to see that. I marvel at what you've done in a short period of time. And then with Astera, that was at the same time period.
Yeah, so I started them both basically at the same time again, like kind of unfortunately, but so yeah, so Astera, so I mean, it does a few things. It works on like scientific publishing and like a few other things, but its main focus is AI, and it's essentially looking at like there's lots of AI labs right now. We're kind of trying to take a different tact, and again, it's one of these things where I think it's clearly going to happen soon. We'll have machines that can think kind of on the level of humans, and that will just be super impactful and basically change everything. So anything that I think that I want to do, I'm like, well, it'd be better to figure out AI to be able to do that thing first, right? So it just seems like the highest leverage thing you can do, especially like given my background. So it's really hard not to work on. So but yeah, so our approach.
I think, wait, just one second. I think you told me like 2 years ago that AGI was right on the cusp. Do you still think that?
Yeah, I think we'll have it quite soon here. I don't know. It's depends on what you mean by AGI and like when it'll be, but things are going to start changing really quickly over the next few years here. It's going to get really crazy. So
okay, so I interrupted you. Tell us more about Astera.
Oh yeah, so basically, again, there's like tons of big open or AI labs like OpenAI and Anthropic and DeepMind, all these guys, right? And so, but they're all kind of working in a very similar direction, just like taking like machine learning and kind of like scaling it up and like doing some things like this. So and that's obviously having an impact and it's working to some degree, but I still think there's like this kind of like fundamental piece that's missing, and so we're looking closer at how the brain actually works and like trying to figure out the algorithms that are represented in the brain, like like how does the basal ganglia like affect decision making and all this kind of stuff, or how does the hippocampus store memories, and because I think these are the kind of the pieces that are missing from the current models. And so, I think probably the real solution will be some marriage of these things where, we'll learn, like we'll get insight from the actual brain of how to do decision making and reasoning and planning, and kind of tack that on to these larger models. So that's kind of the route we're going down. So it's been pretty fun.
We had this conversation not that long ago where we talked about why there's this difference in terms of acceptance, or difference in terms of how regulators have approached blockchain versus artificial intelligence. Do you have a sense as to why you think that it seems like artificial intelligence is kind of accepted by the regulators as something that's going to be powerful and potentially good? And they haven't tried to restrict it or to regulate it out of existence, which some say that's what's happening in blockchain. Do you have a sense as to why that might be?
Yeah, there's already a lot of existing regulations that touch upon like the things that blockchain touches on. Like, there's tons of regulation around money, movement of money, and like all this kind of stuff. And so, there's already kind of a framework that it can kind of fit into or worry people, right? And whereas with AI, it's like very new, and it's there's no precedent for it, and it's just strange, and people aren't sure what's going to happen. Whereas, if you explain what like blockchain can do, where hey, you can move money instantly to all these people get that, and like and there's like clear worries that arise from that. And so I think that's basically why it's AI is just like further out of like distribution for what these people are used to regulating, right? So
yeah, I think that's a good part of it. I also think that we talk about AI as if AI is an industry. And I think of AI really as that tech that's going to be in every industry. And so there's a little bit of differentiation there because really with blockchain, you can use it for a lot of different things. But for the most part, the focus is on the financial industry.
Right.
And so I think that's probably right in terms of how we think those things through.
Yeah.
So
And there's also the consumer element. I mean, lots of like individual people are like, giving money to these weird things like FTX or whatever, right? And so like there's people are actually losing money or like gaining crazy amounts of money, right? So that part gets like all the consumer protection stuff
yeah.
engaged. So yeah.
Any comments you want to make on the OpenAI drama?
Oh, I don't know. It's super confusing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't really have any more insight than other folks, but yeah, it seems wild.
It was a roller coaster, like
Yeah,
for that weekend, to see how that was going to end up. In terms of the working with respect to space and thinking about like the regulation and the technology and how that's being received, how do you feel about that to date?
I mean, it's another one of these areas where it's brand new. I mean, there's never been a commercial station before, so there isn't a lot of regulation around it yet. So, I mean, I think it's similar to both crypto and AI stuff, where it just hopefully the regulators aren't going to like because they can always just kind of squash these kind of nascent things if they take a heavy-handed approach. So hopefully they're pretty permissive about what people can do up there and how this evolves and kind of wait to see kind of thing. So, but yeah.
How do you find it to date? Like in terms of what you guys are doing, have you found that I know there already are regulations that apply to a lot of the work that you guys are jumping in on, but do you feel like there's a more of a restrained approach?
No, I mean, there's export regulations that like all aerospace stuff has, that we fall under, things like that. But those are, mostly that just means you can only work with U.S. citizens. But yeah, I mean, the stuff where like, actually people in orbit. I mean, a lot of this is kind of still remains to be seen. There's like licenses you have to get from like various organizations, but so far it seems like definitely. I'm definitely way less worried about it than I was during crypto times. So, like that stuff is way more uncertain than this. Like this seems fairly clear what we need to do. So
yeah, that's interesting. If you think about like you're way more certain about this than you are about during the crypto times.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That says a whole lot about this space and where it came from, the blockchain space and where it came from.
Space station, or I don't know, digital money. I don't know.
One seems like it should be a lot easier than the other.
Right.
But unfortunately, maybe we're not seeing that kind of work here. Do you think in your lifetime or in our lifetime, since I know I'm a little older than you, but we're close to the same age, that people will be living in space?
Well, I mean, people live there now, right? Right. I mean, depends on what you mean by living. Like for
really
decades.
Yeah.
Well, also, first of all, I hope to live for a very long time. So yeah, definitely in our lifetimes. Yeah. So, I think probably definitely in the next like 20 years, people will live up there for many years, I think. So.
Well, I hope that you make a little corner of the space station that I can live on up there with tumbleweeds and a bunch of other stuff that feels like my home in Gilroy.
Right. Definitely trying. Yeah, we're trying to get as much space up there as possible.
Now, in terms of what I marvel at with you, Jed, all the time, constantly when we talk, is the fact that like, you have learned so much about so many different things. So just in terms of what we just talked about, like if you look back on this conversation and learning about like the brain and how the brain works, and then thinking about like space and what you need to think about with respect to space and what parts of the space can be harmful and how we can ameliorate some of those harms. How do you get this kind of knowledge? I mean, you didn't learn it in school. This isn't something you learn in school. So how do you get that?
I mean, it's just a lot of reading, honestly. I mean, that's the way I learn best is just like reading. So just read a ton of books, and both of those things I'd been reading on for a long time. So, and then, definitely on the vast side, we've managed to get really awesome engineers. And so I've learned a ton from them, just like talking to them, discussing things. I mean, kind of the cool thing about that is it's engineering in the same way that software engineering is engineering, but you just have a different set of constraints. You're like constrained by actual physics rather than like weird things computers can do. So The actual thought process is very similar to what I'm used to. It's just I just have to learn these kind of different, again, like these different constraints. So um, in some sense, that's been like way easier to like dig into than the AI side, like the brain. Like the brain is super complicated, and it's biology is just like super messy and very unclear, and um, yeah, that's definitely way more to learn there. So
Yeah, it's like still an art, not a science. Now, because it's super complicated, messy, and unclear, is that going to keep you more focused and more engaged in this space, you think, for a while? Or how do you think about that in terms of the next thing? Or are you like, no, heads down in this for now?
oh yeah, I mean, I don't plan on starting anything else besides these
I'm
two
going to hold
things
you to that, by the
for
way.
the rest of my life, probably. I mean, the AI thing is like, I mean, there's like, I mean, once you figure it out, it's like, I think the quote is like, it's like kind of the last science project, essentially. Like once you figure out AI, then it's like solving everything else for you. So, um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I can't imagine like wanting to do something else after that. So, yeah.
One time we were talking about, I think it was Chat GPT, or it could have been Google's, but I think it was Chat GPT. And I asked if you use it for coding, and you answered that you did. Do you still?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wrote this little thing. I mean, the Copilot is kind of catching up to my thing, but yeah, I have this little program called Baloo that basically like like it's kind of like it seems like kind of like a crappy intern basically, but it's still helpful. It's definitely helpful when you're like writing stuff that you're not like with C++ is not very helpful, but with like some language I'm not very good at or something or new to, then it's definitely helpful. So yeah.
And so you think for C++, but you did say like you think for like Java and JavaScript and other things, it was actually pretty good in terms of this is
Well,
I'm
just
just
like
giving this
yeah,
information out there for these new programmers that are starting and they want to test some of their skills.
yeah, I think it's just super useful when there's like some framework or language or system that you're not that familiar with. Then it can kind of like do some skeleton of stuff for you, so you understand like the paradigm a little bit better. And then, I mean, like you're gonna have to get in there and do like the nuts and bolts and refactor things just because it makes dumb decisions still. But so like it like again, it's like it seems like a very crappy intern. You can ask it to do things and it'll do them, but you're gonna have to go clean it up and like fix it, right? So but for languages super well or like things it's just faster to type still. So
And so given that you still have two businesses that you're running and you have the SDF, which you're pretty involved in, I mean, how is it that you break up your time?
yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I spend like, well, I mean, let's see, like, I guess I spend like a day or so, probably like a day a week or, a day every 2 weeks down in LA to do vast stuff. And then most of the rest of the time is focused on AI things. Um, but, uh, but yeah, I mean, there's no real clean division. It's, like I'm kind of available on both sides, like anytime someone pings me or whatever. So, um, yeah, it's not ideal, but in some sense, it's like it's a little fun to like switch gears so much every
Oh
time.
yeah. Yeah, I
So
could see the value in that. And I do. I mean, every time I ping you, I get a ping back. So
right.
you're there and available to all of us in all times. In terms of just one question, just to do a really gratuitous plug with respect to Stellar and Sorbonne and the smart contract platform, how is that for you? Given that in the early days of Stellar, we had made a decision that we didn't need to have a smart contract platform. So we're coming full circle now.
Yeah, I think I definitely think it's the right decision. I wish we had done it years ago. Obviously, it was kind of one of these things where we were actually considering doing some smart contract thing back in early Ripple days, but we kind of put it off. And then once Ethereum was starting, and then when we started Stellar, we were like, okay, let's just leave that aside. Maybe it makes more sense just to be more opinionated about what people need and give them all the kind of the building blocks that we think that they'll need. And I still think that it's in some way that's true, but it just doesn't work with people's like mentality, right? So like people want to be able to experiment and do different things. And um, so yeah, I guess if I had to do it over again, we would have done it earlier, or at least had it on the side where people could experiment somehow, and maybe that stuff got pulled into the main branch like periodically or something like that. But yeah, so it's cool to watch. I'm pretty excited about it. I think it'll like open up a lot of like possibilities and like all these kind of use cases and stuff that we didn't that are kind of hard or kludgy to do now. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely good that it's happening. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what people start building with it. So
yeah, me too. I actually think that you were just ahead of things, because I do think that with technology like that, having an opinionated view on the outcomes and what you're building is something that people want eventually. It's just that
right,
in the early stage, it's hard because people are like, oh, I want to play with this and see what I can do. So,
right,
but I think the smart contract space is going to be so interesting for us. So,
yeah,
Jed, I love you. It's so awesome to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time. It is, I like you, I marvel over all the stuff that you do, and that you do still have time for all of your children. all, all of those companies out there that you start, you still have time for us. So we're
yeah.
really grateful for that. And thank you very much for
Okay, yeah,
coming on
great.
Block by Block.
Okay, all right, thanks. See you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Block by Block. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released. And follow me on Twitter to stay in the loop in between episodes. I'll talk to you next time.